Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we're very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. My friends, a tremendous amount is going on in the world. Obviously, the whole Putin and Trump summit in Helsinki, all very, very positive. I'm very happy about it. Across the globalists are hating this because, you know, he's taking apart all of their crisis points when they need a crisis. The North Korean Peninsula, the Cold War with Russia, which they fomented back from 1905 on. So very, very happy that Trump has had such success as a diplomat, and I'm going to stop right there with that because we're going to get into some other things that are a lot deeper and also bring into some historical understanding of why countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia and Romania, actually Eastern Europe, are not accepting the Muslim invasion set up by the international bankers. And before we get there, I wanted to go back to this picture of Mingala, and because I found it very interesting because I have never seen a picture or a drawing of Mingala in his Nazi uniform. But I wanted to bring up something, and one is his quote that I read to you last week. And basically it's this: the more we do to you, the less you seem to believe it. Now, mind you, this guy tortured children, tortured many children, okay? But what I wanted to get back to the uniform is look at the very top of his cover, his hat, on his uniform, right above the brim. You're going to see the skull and bones again. And you'll see this on all of these people that were part of the skull and bones in the hierarchy of the Nazi movement in Germany. And of course, that takes us back to what? The skull and bones at Yale University and other places that are very prominent organizations within the elite of our country. But I wanted to bring that to your attention again. And again, listen to the man's quote: the more we do to you, the less you seem to believe it. Absolutely true. Now, before we get into some historical things, I don't know if you saw this, my friends, but the IRS has revoked 362,000 passports from U.S. citizens. They are not allowed to leave the country. They don't have a passport. They are domestic prisoners. And what is no court, no jury? We're just going to restrict your rights, ha ha ha. You mean your benefit to travel. And understand this, my friends, 362,000 passports. The IRS has decided that we're not going to let you travel because you owe us. Their perception is that you owe us. Again, when we've read this to you before, have you seen the law that says the average American citizen has to pay a portion of his or her sweat equity to a corporation that gives all of that earnings, as the Grace Committee, as we read to you verbatim, reported to us from the 80s, that, to use their words, not one nickel of the American people's income taxes go to the operations of the government. It all goes to who? The private for-profit banking corporation you know as the Federal Reserve. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to get into, my friends, is this chart from a study that was done, and I'm going to be real quick with this for the sake of time because I really want to get into some of this history here. Basically, this study was put together by two political scientists, Martin Gillens of Princeton and Benjamin Page of Northwestern. And the study has gotten a lot of attention, I will say, because what they have found out, and I'm going to read this verbatim, is that the United States is a corrupt oligarchy where ordinary voters barely matter. Or as they put it, folks, listen to these words, Economic elites and organized interest groups play a substantial part in affecting public policy, but the general public has little or no independent influence. And you thought they were answering to you. You thought this is a benevolent organization. Okay. Now, folks, I'm gonna continue here, but I just want to read some of the quotes from this study. Basically, average citizens only get what they want if the economic elites or other interest groups also want it. Okay. Actually, folks, I'm going to go on here. They really broke this down percentage-wise. And listen to this. What groups most influence public policy? Preferences of average citizens, 0.03. Preferences of the global economic elites, 0.76. So the you and I is 0.03. The bankers, the corporations, the global elite, the economic elite are 0.76. And then the interest groups are 0.56. So what does that tell you? Isn't that incredible? All right, I want to continue with this. Basically, folks, they broke it down even more and found out that it's literally 20% of the wealthy make up the policy change more dramatically. But when 80% of them were in support, to 20% of the wealthy Americans supported policy change, it only happened about 18% of the time. But when 80% of them were in support, the change ended up happening was 45% of the time. Okay? There's no similar effect for average Americans. So what they're telling you is that the more of the wealthy that got together, the more avenues they had to put pressure on or pay off or whatever these corrupted politicians, that there was only 20% of them, 18% at the time they had effect, but when they could organize themselves, when 80%, they had a 45% efficiency. So very, very interesting. All right, some other things that we found out is that the people who made $146,000 a year, now this is in 2012 dollars they're using, had an imperfect measure, okay? They found that such strong effects, even here they write, it would be reasonable to infer that the impact upon policy of truly wealthy citizens is still the greater. It is meaningful when public opinion is split between budget proposals no one understands. So they're asking, is it meaningful when public opinion is split between budget proposals no one understands? Of course, they get into all these numbers. Yes, it's true. When there's more confusion, less gets done. Absolutely. Do you remember what we talked about earlier in the study we're going to get back into? Our technical manual, operator's manual that we've been breaking down for you? How the science, the mechanisms of control to bring in what? Hold on, let me read that again to you. It is apparently impossible to discuss social engineering or the automation of a society, i.e. the engineering of social automation systems on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives, now listen, of social control and destruction of human life, i.e. slavery and genocide. Okay, what was the mechanisms and what was the tool? Mathematics. Mathematics. Remember that? So, of course, it is meaningful to have the public opinion split between budget proposals which no one can understand. Doesn't that perfectly make sense? It goes along with exactly what this study found with what the tools are with the manual that we've been covering. Okay, I'm going to be real quick here, folks, with that. And I want to get into these graphs. Okay, the average citizen's preferences. This was predicted probability of adoption. In other words, what was the effect and what was the percentage? Well, if you look at the growth, it was, as they said here, it was 0.03%. Look what we got. Flat line, all the way across. This is you and I. This is you and I's effect on the percentage of probability that we're going to have our desired proposals adopted. This is you and I, folks. Flatline, no growth at all. Look at the economic elites and look at the interest groups' alignments. Growth, 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 and growth all the way through. Here we are. See it, folks? Here they are. This was a long-term study. They actually took data from 1981 to 2014. You see my point here? Unbelievable. Okay, let's be real quick here. I've been following this because I was really surprised when this church got approved in China. But I'm just going to be real quick here. On 7/17 this past year, communist authorities demolished a well-known Christian church. Now, folks, understand, this church had all the permits, was built, like I said, in 2006. It was flourishing, and it was a Catholic church. It was the Chinese Christian Fellowship of Righteousness church, and it was a Catholic church, and the Chinese authorities came in, and they forcibly took the pastors from the buildings. They confiscated all the church records, the cell phones, computers, etc. And they destroyed all the church buildings within 15 minutes of starting. Now, you may say to yourself, well, that's China. That's China. Well, you got to understand, this was a Catholic church. The Pope has nothing but praises for the Chinese government. Praises. It's disgusting. So, why is he praised the Chinese government that is destroying his churches, his businesses, his franchises? Because they're not churches, folks. They're businesses. They are franchises. You got to understand that. Now, you may say, well, that can never happen here, Tom. Okay. This is from ToddStarnes.com. Cease and desist. Cease and desist orders. A town orders family to stop hosting Bible studies on farm. The owners of a Pennsylvania farm have been ordered by the Solvecki Heights Borough to cease and desist holding Bible studies on their private property. Borough leaders accuse Scott and Terry Flithoff of improperly using their 35-acre farm as a place of worship, a place of assembly, and as a commercial venue. They were served a cease and desist order in October, the Post-Gazette reports. Now, I bring this up, folks, because this is all stepping stones. Remember when China outlawed home churches? And listen, folks, all your churches are 501c3 IRS corporations because that's how they get their tax breaks. And then they have to follow the Johnson Act. That's right. You ever wonder why your church doesn't ever talk about the government or any policies of the government? Including abortion, the murdering of babies, the confiscation of wealth, the destruction of property, the reduction of 362 passports for people who own the Bankers Collective Service called the IRS. Why is it that the churches never speak of such matters? Because what they're really concerned about is not your having knowledge, it's that tax break. That's what it's all about, folks. So, no, they do not want home study Bible churches in the true sense of the word churches, where one or more gather in my name, said Jesus Christ. They don't want that. Because these churches will not be under the Johnson Act, you see. They don't care about the 501c3 IRS tax break. They're not meeting to profit. They are meeting to learn, to gain knowledge, to seek truth, and also to bring benevolence to their fellow man. Their goal is to get closer to God through knowledge and love and truth, not profit. See the difference? Let us continue here. The Independent Law Center filed a federal lawsuit on behalf of the farmers against the borough, alleging a violation of the U.S. Constitution. According to the lawsuit, the Fetterloffs were threatened with fines of $500 per day, plus court costs for having Bible studies at their home, having meetings where religious songs are sung, conducting any religious retreats for church leaders or any seminary students, or conducting any religious fundraisers. Ooh. Were they doing this? No, there was no fundraising. The borough has no business overseeing a group of people reading and discussing a book together on private property, even if that book is the Bible, Attorney Randall Wagner said in a statement. The lawsuit accuses the government leaders of violating religious freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and equal protection under the law. Government should not target religious activities for punishment, particularly when secular activities are permitted. In America, no government can categorically ban people from assembling to worship on one's property. My folks, we're going to be following this very, very closely. This is a big stepping stone as to where they wish to take us. Okay, now let's get into this real quick. This gentleman right here, John Sobeski, is a actually, I'm going to read this story quick, and I'm going to be, for the sake of time, I'm going to read this verbatim and try to keep my comments real quick. It's rather long, but it gives you a really good understanding of how a people can be unified through knowledge and understanding history. I'm going to leave it right there. Okay. This is from the AmericanThinker.com. Headline, History Explains Eastern European Hostility to Islam. Considering that thousands of Catholics formed a human chain around the borders of Poland late last year to pray for peace and against the Islamization of Europe. Whoa! Did you hear about this on the mainstream media? No, you didn't. Folks, thousands and thousands of people got together, held hands, and prayed on the Polish border. You couldn't get the Americans to do that unless there was some kind of sporting event or some kind of entertainment venue. What accounts for this staunchy anti-Islamic response? The answer rests in history. Unlike most Western European nations, which, thanks to their geographical proximity, have for centuries been out of the reach of and thus have forgotten all about Islam, Eastern Europeans are intimately acquainted with it. Indeed, an event that occurred this week in history sheds much light on the current situation. On July 14, 1683, the largest Islamic army ever to invade European territory, which is saying much considering the thousands of invasions preceding it since the 8th century, came and surrounded Vienna, the heart of the Holy Roman Empire and de facto nemesis of Islam. Some of the 200,000 Muslim combatants under the leadership of the Ottomans, the one state in nearly 14 centuries of Islamic history most dedicated to and founded on the principles of jihad, invaded under the same rationale the so-called radical groups such as the Islamic State cite to justify the jihad on infidels today. Or to quote the leader of the Muslim expedition, Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, because Vienna was perceived as the head of the infidel snake, it needed to be laid low so that all Christians would obey the Ottomans. This was no idle boast. Sources describe Mustafa as fanatically anti-Christian. After capturing a Polish town in 1674, he ordered all the Christian prisoners, now listen to this, to be skinned alive and their stuffed hides sent as trophies to the Ottoman Sultan Muhammad IV. Such supremacist hate was standard and on display during the elaborate pre-jihad ceremony preceding the siege of Vienna. And then the Sultan, desiring him, Mustafa, to fight generously for the Mohammedan faith, to quote a contemporary European, placed the standard of the prophet into his hands for the extirpation of infidels and the increase of Muslim men. Once the massive Muslim army reached and surrounded the walls of Vienna on July 14th, Mustafa followed protocol. In 628, his prophet Muhammad had sent an ultimatum to Emperor Heraclius, submit to Islam and have peace. Heraclius rejected the summons. Jihad was declared against Christendom as enshrined in the Quran in 921, and in a few decades, 2/3 of the then Christian world, including Spain, all of North Africa, Egypt, and Greater Syria, were all conquered. Folks, listen to where I just said. That was like the basic, that's the heartland of the time of Christendom. Now, over 1,000 years later, the same ultimatum of submission to Islam or death has reached the heart of Europe. And let me stop here. Let me stop here. I wanted to read, anyway, I sort of messed myself up here a little bit, but anyway, folks, this is a tool of the bankers. Remember the quote from 1871? The letter from Albert Pike that we've read to you many times. Albert Pike, 3 World War, to Giuseppe Mazzini. Just go on the internet and punch in Albert Pike's letter, 3 World Wars. It'll come up. But this is order ab chaos, order from chaos. They are using this history, this hatred, this indoctrination, this extremism of the Quran, and they are fomenting it as a tool to subject Western culture, Christendom, to defeatism. And they've done this by creating and balkanizing the Middle East, and then creating this need, this necessity, because the people in the Middle East, due to our destruction, are living in absolute horrific conditions. And then when they have given transportation to go to a place which is beautiful, and there's, you know, an enemy to be defeated, there's a jihad to bring forth. And oh, and by the way, George Soros is going to give me a ride, and the government's going to let me have all these benefits. Well, why wouldn't you, if you're indoctrinated through this religion? But think of the history behind it. Okay, now over 1,000 years later, the same ultimatum of submission to Islam or death has reached the heart of Europe, all through the actions of the international bankers. Although the Viennese commander did not bother to respond to the summons, graffiti inside the city, including Mohammed, you dog, go home, seems to capture its mood. So it would be war. And see, this is where they come up with these, Benghazi was because of a video that someone put out on the internet. Had nothing to do with it. Zero. That's how they sold it to you. So it would be war. On the next day, Mustafa unleashed all hell against the city's walls, and for 2 months, the holed-up and vastly outnumbered Viennese suffered plague, dysentery, starvation, and many casualties, including women and children, in the name of jihad. Then on September 12th, when the city had reached its final extremity and the Muslims were about to burst through, Vienna's prayers were answered, as an ominous Englishman explained. After a siege of 60 days, accompanied with 1,000 difficulties, sicknesses, wants of provisions, and great effusion of blood, after millions of cannon and musket shot, bombs and grenades, and all sorts of fireworks, which has changed the face of the fairest and most flourishing city in the world, disfigured and ruined it, heavenly favorable heard the prayers and tears of a cast down and a mournful people. The formidable king of Poland, John Sobieski, this is the gentleman that you see on your screen, had finally come at the head of a 65,000 heavily armed Poles, Austrians, and Germans. Now think about this, folks. There's 200,000 Muslims. This guy's coming with 65,000. So rough numbers, not using Common Core numbers, of course, but rough numbers, you're looking at a 3-to-1 ratio here. And In this type of warfare, the attacker is always at the disadvantage because the attacker is exposed. Arguing that it is not a city alone that we have to save, but the whole of Christianity, of which the city of Vienna is the bulwark, Sobieski led a thunderous cavalry charge, history's largest, and against and totally routed the Muslim besiegers. Now, folks, if you want to, there's an awesome book on this that I referenced a little. It's called Sword and the Shemitah. Although a spectacular victory, the aftermath was gory before fleeing. The Muslims ritually slaughtered more than 30,000 Christian captives and collected during their march to Vienna, raping the women beforehand. Same thing going on today. The only difference now is that at least the authority or the governments, if you would, of that time would try and defend the people. Now, the courts, the police, the government, the authorities, they're all against the people. On entering the relieved city, the liberators encountered piles of corpses, sewage, and rubble everywhere. And it is this history of Islamic aggression, beginning in the 14th century when Muslims first established a foothold in southeastern Europe, and into the 12th century when the Ottoman Sultanate finally collapsed, and that informs Eastern views of Islam. As one Pole, echoing the words of Sobieski, said during last year's Human Chain demonstration, a religious war between Christianity and Islam is once again underway in Europe, just like in the past. Whereas the Western nations cite lack of integration, economic disparities, and grievances to explain away the exponential growth of terrorism, violence, and rapes that come with living alongside large Muslim populations, Eastern nations see only a continuity, of hostility. I'm trying to rush too fast. Okay. We have several Eastern European nations been, why have several Eastern European nations been so adamant against taking in Muslim migrants? Most recently, when Polish lawmaker Dominik Czarnecki was asked earlier this month how many refugees Poland has taken in, he flatly responded, 0. When the British interviewer, whose nation has taken in millions of Muslim migrants, scoffed, "And you're proud of that?" he said, "We will not receive even one Muslim, because that is what we promised to our voters. This is why our government was elected. This is why Poland is safe. And this is why we have not had even one terror attack." Considering that thousands of Catholics formed a human chain along the border of Poland last year to pray for peace and against the Islamization of Europe, it is clear that the Polish government is acting on behalf of the people. Wow, what a thought. What a thought, an elected leader acting as the people desired. What accounts for this staunchly anti-Islamic response? The answer rests in history. Unlike most Western European nations, which thanks to their geographical proximity have for centuries been out of reach, and let's not forget, folks, the indoctrination centers, the public fool centers, the churches. It's not just geographical anymore, because technology has taken us to a point where, well, you can't hide anywhere on the earth. And you can now get information anywhere on the earth. And they have kept, the schools and the churches have kept all this information from all the conquering desired cities and nations that they want to use this Muslim hordes to come in for the order ab chaos, the order from chaos. Okay. Thanks to their geographical proximity, half for centuries been out of reach, and thus have forgotten all about Islam, Eastern European, ultimately equated with it. Ha ha ha. No, they've been indoctrinated from it. Okay, folks, I am going to stop here. You get the gist idea of it, and I am going to stop there because for the sake of time, I want to get back into our document. Anyway, Mr. John Sobieski III, I compliment you through history, and I really, really have fond memories, my friends. I married into a family of 100% Poles. My father-in-law was 8 years old, living 14 kilometers from the German border when the Germans came over the border. He wound up in Dachau as a child. he, on his deathbed, said to me that, he was ready to go on, and I don't want to get too personal in this, but one of the things he said to me was that he's ready to go on, and he doesn't want to watch the bankers do to what they did to his nation to another nation. That, from the words of a dying man who, as a child at 8 years old, was in Dachau. I do not wish to watch to what the bankers did to my country do to this country. And let's look into one of their number one ways and mechanisms of doing what they're doing to our country. Remember the words of Mr. Mengele. The more we do to you, the less you seem to believe it. It is patently impossible to discuss social engineering or the augmentation of a society, i.e. the engineering of social augmentation systems, the silent weapons, on a national or worldwide scale without implying extensive objectives of social control and destruction of human life, i.e. slavery and genocide. Operators Research Technical Manual, Tango Michael dash Sierra Whiskey 7905.1. Okay. When we left this, we were studying the breakdown of short list of inputs. And the inputs were payments, methods of coping, sensitivities to pain, national input information, IRS and so forth, shocking stimuli, all this. So now we're going to get into their short list of outputs. And the outputs, my friends, the inputs allow them to bring in all the data, chronologically siphon through the data, and then analyze, be very analytical with the data in a lot of perspectives. And that's what we're going to get into now. What were they able to do by the use of the data they were able to collect from us and on us and about us? Short list of outputs. Technical Manual, TM, Sierra Whiskey 7905.1. Outputs. Create controlled situations. Manipulation of the economy, hence society. Let me read that again. Short list of outputs. Again, what are they able to do with all this data after they put it through their process? Create controlled situations. My friends, in the words of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the card-carrying member of the American Communist Party, Socialist Party, excuse me. Same. What they do, my friends, what Roosevelt said was that if it happened in politics, you can bet it was meant to happen that way. Folks, there is nothing that surprises the government, besides maybe the awakening that's taken place amongst the people that Zbigniew Brzezinski said 4 years ago. There is a political awakening taking place in the world as the world has never witnessed in its history. That is their number one concern, and that is their number one surprise. But other than that, any events that take place, terror attacks, legislation, anything, you will find that the government and or their cohorts are behind these events. The dollar drops, the dollar goes up, unemployment, all of it. There's nothing, folks, that they do not control. You got to understand that. Listen to what they openly are telling their students they do control. Create controlled situations. Manipulation of the economy, hence society. Control by control of compensation and income. Think of that. And you think we have a laissez-faire economy? Do you know in Mexico, I've been told, I shouldn't probably say this, I have been told that Mexico, for blue-collar workers, when you're under a certain guise or category of workers, have a maximum wage, not a minimum wage, a maximum wage. And I've heard this from a very reliable source, and I didn't go out and research it myself, and I shouldn't have probably said anything, but how do you think that affects compensation, economic compensation? Having a maximum wage. You're allowed to make $1.85 an hour. End of story. Sequence. It allocates opportunities. Number one. Number two, destroys opportunities. Number three, controls the economic environment. Number four, controls the availability of raw materials, including food, including oil. Remember the 73 embargo by OPEC? Who set up OPEC, folks? We did. We set up OPEC. We've read that to you, all that verbatim years ago. And I ain't got the time to get back into it, but we fomented OPEC. And I told you the reason why we did it. It was because there was no more gold or silver to back our overseas petrodollar. That's right. The United States, the bankers were running $2 at that point. They had a domestic dollar based on our ignorance, our sweat equity, which was all based on debt. But in 1973, when the bankers had confiscated all the wealth of gold, there was no more wealth to back up the petrodollar. So we formed OPEC, oil-producing, exporting countries, and we went up to Saudi Arabia and said, hey, Mr. Saudi Arabia, Prince Sultan, we're going to protect you militarily. We're not going to get involved in your domestic affairs. We're going to make you rich beyond all. The United States is going to buy all of its oil from you. We're going to form this organization called the EPA and use it to shut down all domestic oil production in the United States. And hence, because we're going to do all this for you, you're going to take a percentage of your earnings and you're going to buy these things called treasury bonds to back this non-intrinsic valued commodity called the petrodollar. And then if anybody gets hip to it, like Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi and some others, and try to use an intrinsic backed medium of exchange outside the petrodollar, well, don't worry about it. We'll create a propaganda and we'll just send all the boys and girls from the United States, put them in nice little uniforms, motivate them through crisis, through that Hegelian dialectic, crisis, reaction, solution, and we'll send them off to war, and we'll destroy whatever countries go against the Bretton Woods Agreement, which set this whole thing up. That's how it works, folks. Let us continue. Controls the availability of raw materials. I just gave you one example. Food is vital. Water. What they do with the EPA? Oh, I want to clean up the water. Oh, really? Really? We want to control the water. What was it Heinz Kissinger said? You control people through controlling food. You control nations through controlling what? Oil. He also said that his God was gold, oil, and drugs, because that's what he profited on. 4, controls the availability of raw materials. 5, controls capital. 6, controls bank notes. What is a bank note? A note is an acknowledgement of debt. This is what you have in your pockets that you base the value of your life on, how many of these bank notes you have in your pocket. Although you erroneously call them dollars. They're not dollars because a dollar is 25.8 grains of gold and a 51 ratio of silver. There's no more gold, there's no more silver, as I just explained to you, and there hasn't been since 1973. Control of bank notes. They're controlling the script that are banknotes that you base your life on, that you're a co-surety for, to your sweat equity through the collection agency IRS, which just stopped 362,000 Americans from being able to leave the country because their perception is that they owe them some kind of sweat equity. So the bank, private for-profit bankers, Federal Reserve, can collect that sweat equity. And it does two things. And it makes them powerful beyond all through the use of intimidation, which is the definition of terrorism. And it also, my friends, makes the reduction of purchasing power less inevitable. Because the more of these useless banknotes that they put out into circulation, there is an interest bond due on each and every one of them, and that's what the debt is all about. Because if you produce one of these banknotes, there's an obligation of interest on it, so you produce another banknote to cover the interest on the original banknote. Well, now what happens? Now you've got to cover, it doubles. The interest doubles, because now I got to cover this one. Oh, then it quadruples, and it goes on. It's perpetual debt. It was set up to be that way. And we read all that to you from G. Edward Griffith's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, where all the bankers got together secretly with the main liaison from Rhode Island, Senator Aldrich, going down to off the coast of Georgia, Jekyll Island, where J.P. Morgan owned, and they all met and devised the Federal Reserve Act, and then the Federal Reserve Act was put into play on December 21st, 1913, while the Congress was away for the Christmas break. How come you don't hear or read this history in your public fool system? Number 6, control of bank notes. Notice they didn't say dollars. Oh, and you may ask yourself, well, how is it I became a co-surety to this debt? I'm going to tell you why, folks. Because you are bonded. We are nothing more than chattel, movable property which has been liened. And you may say, well, how did that happen, Tom? I'll tell you how it happened, folks. And don't go yelling at your mother. But your mother was the only one. Because when you're an infant, you're not old enough by law to negotiate contract. Well, who is? Because of the natural relationship with you. Your mother. Your mother's in the hospital. She just wants to get out of there and get you home. I understand that. You know, they come in with a whole slew of papers, sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here. Hey, we're Americans. We don't read contracts anymore. We just sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here. And they really don't expect you to read the contracts anymore, do they? They really don't expect you to. You go get a car loan or a mortgage death pledge. You go get a death pledge, and what happens? The average American sits there and the banker says, well, here are the terms. We're going to charge you X amount of interest rate. This is your monthly payment for the term of this, and here you go. Have a good day. You don't read the whole thing, do you? When you go to the hospital and they're signing you in, just sign here. Man, you're in pain. You're not feeling good. You may be, on meds. You're not even, you can't even think about reading. Just sign here. It's what we do. We're Americans. We have been instituted and indoctrinated to act that way. Folks, I've seen it. I've taken people down to definitive care centers down in New Hampshire. And of course, you know, there's a 4-page thing. They're in the gurney. If they're in the back of my ambulance and I'm taking them down to this definitive care center down in New Hampshire, guess what? They are in the hurt locker. And they'll meet you right in the hallway. Sign here. They got it all set up. Just sign. Nobody reads that stuff. I had 2 patients that actually tried to take the time to read, and the person was getting impatient with them because they actually wanted to read, and they got so frustrated that they just signed it and away we went. That's how we are. 7, control the inflation of the currency. What is inflation? Inflation is the reduction of purchasing power of a medium of exchange. My mother, when I was being, raised back in the 50s and 60s, my mother could buy a loaf of bread for, say, 20 cents. Full loaf of bread, 20 cents. Today, that same loaf of bread might cost you $2, $4. So, what's changed, folks? Is it the loaf of bread that changed? No. No. What's changed is the reduction of the purchasing power of that medium of exchange. Now, I've said to you before that when I was a young fella, I had a job on Sundays from 8 to 2 in the afternoon. I used to pump gas every Sunday, and I got paid $2. And you may say, wow, man, you got ripped off, man. $2 for 6 hours work in 1965? Folks, a candy bar in 1965 was a nickel. A candy bar today is what? $1.50, $2.50? I don't know. I don't eat candy. I didn't even eat candy back then. I'm just using it as an analogy. So, what's changed? Again, the candy bar? No, the purchasing power. And that's what inflation is. And they can control that through issuing more money, forgive me, I spoke erroneously. It's not money. It's a note. Money, as we read to you in our Black's Law Dictionary, does not encompass debt. What's a note? An acknowledgement of debt. So we don't even have money. Do you understand that? We do not have money. If you want to get down to what we do have, we have script. A commercial script of a private, for-profit banking corporation known as the Federal Reserve. That's what we have. And there's an interest bond, as I said, due on every one of them, and we're the co-surety to it. And that's why we can never get out of debt as long as we continue to use the commercial script of a for-profit banking corporation. Number 7, controls the inflation of the currency. Number 8, controls the possession of property. Folks, this is all what they've been able to do. Controls the possession of property. And you say, hey, wait a minute, I owe my property. I don't have a mortgage on that. Oh, really? Go ahead and don't pay an extortion fee you know is property taxes, and you're going to find out who really owns your property. And if you want to find out for yourself, my friends, without going through that hassle, go get your deeds. Do you have a lordal title? A lordal, meaning it's Latin for absolute. Or do you have certificate of title? Certificate. Bearer jus of. Certificate means, one, it's a negotiable instrument, meaning it holds value. And two, it means bearer use of. Someone is allowing you to use something of value. It's not yours, but they're allowing you to use something of value. Your car. Every state that your car is in gets an MCO, Manufacturer's Certificate of Origination. The state gets that. Why? Because that has value. That's the true possession of the car. And that's how the state, fill in the blank, can give you a certificate of title because they are in true ownership of that vehicle. Same with your land. Senate Document 43. All property is in the state and subordinate to the necessities of the state. We've read it to you how many times verbatim? You see? How about your children? You think you own your children? Well, they have a certificate of title also, don't they? It's called the birth certificate. You see? So your children, and ourselves included, have been monetized. Our sweat equity has been monetized. You see? Because they maintain the value. And we pay them. And we pay them. And we pay them. And we continue to pay them. And we live in a state of fear. Fill in the blank of all these agencies. The American people live in a state of fear. Really? You don't think so? Why do you pay the IRS and you've never seen the law that says you have to pay the IRS? And you know why I know you've never seen the law that says the average American taxpayer has to, I shouldn't even use that word because that's how they qualify you. Because if you look up the IRS code, folks, the definition of taxpayer, the average American does not meet that definition. Why would Senator Harry Reid say we have a voluntary tax system? Because we do. Because you fill out an application when dealing with the IRS. You volunteered your sweat equity. Why? Because we're ignorant as a people and because we live in fear as a people. Folks, there is no law. Go on the internet, punch it in. Joe Bannister, so many former IRS agents have come forward with all this. Court cases have actually been won with this. But we live in a state of intimidation and fear. This is why. And we do not own a thing. Controls the possession of property. Folks, we own zilch. Nothing. Stugotz. Zero. Nothing. We don't even own ourselves. We don't even own our children. We don't own our vehicles, our land, our houses, nothing. Why do you think you have to go get permits to improve your house and pay them to get permission to do it, and then they'll come in and see what you did to their buildings and their properties, and they will fine you for it through a thing called property taxes. Because after all, you had the gall to improve their house. It's where we're at, folks. It's where we're at as Americans. Number 8. Controls the possession of property. So, I've got 32 on this page alone of we've only done 25% of what they've been able to control by creating portfolios and data on all of us, and through corruption and intimidation and the control of knowledge is what they've done. My friends, we're very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. We always close in asking you to seek truth, to obtain knowledge, and manifest kindness to your fellow man. And we always close in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. And we thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines. Well, the truth is very simple, very hard to find. Can't believe